So good morning, good afternoon, good evening to all our participants on the line. We've had more than 2,000 people register to join. Thanks for being here. Thanks for joining this special UN Global Compact Academy session on COVID-19 and supporting the world of work. I'm Dan Thomas, the Chief Communication Officer at the United Nations Global Compact, where my colleagues and I have been busy working on uniting business to respond to COVID-19 and encouraging our 10,000 CEOs and all other leaders to use our 10 principles as guidance on the difficult decisions they're having to make at this time. You can read more about our appeal and the 10 principles on our website at unglobalcompact.org. The COVID-19 pandemic is a human crisis with huge socio-economic impacts, including on the labor market. Millions of companies worldwide are in danger of being forced out of business with grave impacts on employment and the millions of people who contribute to those enterprises. A couple of weeks ago, the International Labour Organiza estimated up to 25 million jobs worldwide could be lost as a result of this crisis, forcing millions of people into unemployment, underemployment, and working poverty. The effect of that on workers, their families, their communities will be enormous. It is already. And to minimize the social and economic consequences, it's clear that enterprises must respond quickly with innovative solutions to support the continuation of their business activities, to protect their workers and prepare for the recovery. Agreements between governments, employers, and workers' organizations on support packages and social dialogue between managers and workers are key elements to jointly address the impacts of this crisis. And I'm very pleased today to be joined by Mr. Guy Ryder, the Director General of the International Labour Organization, Sharan, Burrow, the General Secretary of the International Trade Union Confederation, and Roberto Suárez Santos, the Secretary General of the International Organization of Employers. Thank you so much for joining us on this call for our participants and business leaders around the world. I'd like to just open up by asking each one of you, maybe Guy first, Sharan second, Roberto third, just to say a little bit about your organization and who you represent. Mr. Ryder.
Yes, hello Dan, hello to everybody online. Well, the International Labour Organization, which I lead, is part of the UN family. It's a specialized agency of the UN. And we look after economic, social and labour policies. We have the particularity, Dan, of being made up not just of governments like the rest of the UN, but also worker and employer organisation and representatives who are built into the decision-making processes that we have. So I think that gives a certain particular responsibility to our organisation in the context of the pandemic, precisely because what you've just said in your introduction. I can perhaps come back to those responsibilities later on in the conversation.
Thank you. Sharan Burrow.
Sharan Burrow, I'm the General Secretary of the International Trade Union Confederation. It's all those national union syndicates that are joined to us globally. So we make up one family of workers around the world. We have more than 207 million members who pay dues, but we represent workers everywhere.
Thank you. And you're also a member of the UN Global Compact Board. Thank you. And so are you, Roberto Suárez Santos. Say a little bit about your organization. Who do you represent?
We were created already 100 years ago when ILO was created, precisely to coordinate the voice of business and to act formally as a secretariat of the employers within the ILO. Now we have moved also working on the area of employment, skills, migration, with other agencies of the UN system. Our members are more than 150 business and employees organizations in more than 140 countries, representing more than 50 million companies, among which many multinationals, which on a daily basis work with us precisely to set and to help in the international scene to improve the impact of business and to also improve the impact of the UN family. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much for joining us, all of you. We're here to talk about the impact of the COVID-19 crisis on the world of work. So first of all, I'd like to just open up by asking each of you just to reflect, on this crisis, the impact that it's having, and the social consequences that it's already having on society and the world. Mr. Ryder.
Yeah, Dan, thanks. Let me kick off by saying you mentioned the report we put out a couple of weeks ago where we made our first estimates on the likely jobs impact of the pandemic. Well, we just put out another report. We're in the process of putting out another report today, and I just want to share with you what the report that we're issuing today is going to say. And it's pretty dramatic because we've, in this very fast-moving story, we've adapted our methodologies. What we're seeing is a wide variety of things happening in the world of work. It's not always that people are losing their job and being made formally unemployed. Some people are on short working time. Some people are on technical unemployment. There's all sorts of situations. So what we've tried to do is to translate the reduction in the total number of hours being worked around the world and translate that into what we call full-time job equivalents. And if you do that, the bad news is that in the second quarter of this year, the second quarter alone, 3 months, we expect the loss of the equivalent of 195 million jobs in the world. We are looking at the destruction of 195 million jobs in the next 3 months. And that comes on top of the experience of the first 3 months of the year, where we estimate, data is very poor, that perhaps 30 to 40 million jobs have already been lost. We started this year at about 190 million unemployed. So you can see we're going into a catastrophic employment situation. It's a disaster. And of course, jobs means people. Jobs also means enterprises in danger. And so the need to integrate an economic and social dimension into the absolute priority of saving people's lives and protecting them from the COVID-19 virus should be apparent to all. Now, we've done a regional and a sectoral breakdown of these figures. The interesting point is that the regional distribution of job losses in percentage terms, it's the Arab world and Europe, which are suffering most, and at this point, Africa least, but that can change over time. And in sectoral terms, well, you won't be surprised if I say that the sectors most affected are food and accommodation, retail and wholesale, business and administrative services, and manufacturing. But, behind these figures, there is a multitude of individual life drama. And I think what this crisis is serving to show to us is just how fragile a lot of the world of work is in normal times. This pandemic is showing the social protection gaps in the world of work. It's pointing to the absolute drama, and I think we have to focus on this, that people in the informal economy, where still 61% of working people make a living, they're basically outside the basic protections that many of us might take for granted through the social security and labor legislation. So I mention these numbers, I don't want to overdo it, to say that we are now faced with an extraordinary social and economic drama. We need to act, we need to make that action an integral part of the overall pandemic response. We need to bring together not just governments, employers, but also employers and workers in this effort. And I think as well, and this will be my final point, Dan, I think we need to internationalize the different national responses that we have seen taking shape around the world. Some of them very commendable, let's not ignore that. But we need a truly global response to this self-evidently global crisis.
Thank you, and thank you for news of your new report as well. That's an extraordinary number and a very troubling picture. Sharan Burrow, what for you are the immediate and current sort of social consequences of COVID-19?
So Guy already gave you a picture of a fractured social contract. And we need to rebuild, renew. In some cases, we need a new social contract where it doesn't exist. So as Guy said, the first focus was on national responses. We called for paid sick leave, for wage support, for income support, because 60% of the global workforce is in fact informal, and that includes the emerging platform business and of course freelancers, independent workers, and the self-employed who fall between us and the business community. And then of course rent, mortgage and loan support, because it wouldn't be lost on any of the audience. If you don't have an income, you can't pay your rent, then the social tragedy is also potentially that you're going to be without safe housing. And of course, universal access to health. I can tell you that already, as Guy indicated in those fractured spaces, that only 21% of the global population are covered with unemployment benefits. Think about that, only 21%. And 38% actually lack health, access to health, to free health, to public health. And now we're seeing, of course, the systems stretched beyond measure, even in countries that do have that capacity. And of course, in the developing world, then as Guy said, we very quickly need to internationalize this. I can give you the figures we've released today of our fortnightly survey, and 68% of countries have in fact now executed some form of lockdown. But while that's about 80% of the workforce, because as Guy said, Africa and to some extent countries in Latin America are still coming on board, that's a massive amount of workers. And we can tell you where the regional gaps are. There's no doubt that overall, Guy's right, 72% of countries are providing some kind of wage and income protection, but there are big regional differences, and that's what's frightening us. 57% of countries in Africa and 35% in the Americas are not provided wage protection. And when you then ask the question, is that enough to cover essential costs, including food, electricity, and housing, then in fact in Asia Pacific, a massive 64% of people said no. So what our call is now is for, of course, as Roberto will tell you, to support businesses, and our SMEs are absolutely upfront, provided, of course, you see business and workers as joined. So support for small to medium enterprises has to mean support for the retention of workers with income support across those areas that make up the security lens. But if you look at who's missing out, and if the massive collapse of employment that Guy alluded to, whether it's part-time or reduced hours, or whether it's just full-time employment, or in the case of the informal economy, frankly, no work for day workers, for people who depend on the tourism and hospitality sectors, for an informal market, for many, many workers, it's simply not there. So apart from all the things we support internationally to support business and jobs, our call now is a massive global protection fund, because if we don't get health and income to workers and their families, then in fact we are going to see a humanitarian devastation none of us wants to experience. And can I just say, in that regard, the transition to income may very well be, as we're seeing particularly in Africa, food and water packages, because now last week there were some 500,000 food packages delivered across Africa, and we expect that to grow massively. So we've called for an urgent meeting of the G20 Labour ministers, hopefully economic ministers as well, with Roberto and the IOE. And today we were talking to the OECD about a similar call, because it's those Labour ministers, their economic ministers and the leaders who can do just what Guy said and internationalise this. We are one world. We need global solidarity.
Thank you, Sharan. Roberto, how about from you, the current and social consequences?
It's a not so long time ago, and Sharan and Guy knows this quite well. The global debates on the world of work were centered on how major changes will transform the future work, how technologies will impact the way we work. There were some debates on fear of job destruction, job creation, how employment is changing, how we need to assume and assure the fundamentals. And we have also an important outcome last year in an international labor conference, which is the centenary declaration of ILO. But nobody could have imagined a disruption as the one that we are experiencing. Not from technology, not from demographics, but due to a global health emergency in just some weeks, which have turned the world upside down. We got disrupted and nobody was prepared for it. I mean, Guy has just given us the figure, the recent figure on 190 million jobs, but I can also refer to companies that are disappearing. I mean, not will disappear, but are disappearing. I mean, if I talk of my own country, just in the month of March, 120,000 companies, small and medium normally, have disappeared. We are talking about a GDP fall of 20-30 GDP in many developed economies, but also in developing economies, at least in 1 month, 2 months. Of course, in the year measurement, it will go somehow down. That is going to be dramatic. And the OECD, I think, that gave us also an important figure, which is that for each month of containment, there will be a loss of 2 percentage points in annual GDP in many countries. I have to underline two things on this, and I don't want to enter into the negative spiral. On one side, the difference between this crisis is that it's affecting both the supply and the demand side. I mean, on one side, you don't have individuals able to spend money, and among many other reasons, because their incomes are not coming, or even if they are coming, they are confined. And on the other side, companies have been forced legitimately to lock down. The other element, which is also unique, is that if you compare it with the last financial crisis, this is really global. I mean, it's affecting all the regions. Even China, which is recovering, will have strong problems, but also in South Asia, and we'll refer to that later. But Latin America is coming, and also you refer to Africa. They are highly worried about the consequence of that. This is also affecting supply chains and what we used to call the globalization. And Guy referred to the fragile structure of this world. I would say that some countries are depending very much on these global supply chain inputs. And now what we have at stake is many manufacturers in many countries, in too many countries, that are not able to cope with their wage obligations. Mm-hmm. And that's creating strong problems and concern, which we are trying to cope with as IOE. But also let's look, and I know it's difficult at this moment, to the opportunities. Most of us have become forcibly digital. Not a CEO, not a business leader, not a politician has a speed that disposes, is this crisis. If we are quick and effective, and that's why Sharan and myself in the joint statement that we signed already 10 days ago, we call for not any kind of measures, but effective and impact-proof measures, meaning by that, those that are really going to go to the real economy, which is the tricky angle. If we put into place these effective and impact-proof measures in critical sectors like tourism, industry, transport, garment, retailers, among others, we will pave the way for a quick recovery, which is the main driver to mitigate the effects.
Thank you.
Bear in mind that not the world will be the same also. We are not going to back to normal, that's for sure.
Thank you.
I have also to say, and to reiterate as a final point, that never before a call for joint action between the private sector and the public sector, but also among the international organization, has been so pertinent.
Thank you very much. Mr. Ryder, business continuity is crucial in protecting jobs and workers. Governments and employers and workers' organizations should act together. What type of innovative actions and policy measures do you see as essential to protecting our societies and economies and to keep the cash flowing to workers and businesses, especially to those most in need?
Continuity is, I think, a very important principle and idea in all of this, Dan. as Roberto and I think Sharan would agree and have both said, we need to keep viable enterprises, enterprises which under any normal conditions would be viable, profitable, going enterprises. They should not be allowed to become one more victim of this pandemic. But the question you're asking is how we do this. And I think that there is a real challenge here, even in countries which have the means and the political will to make available, very large sums of resources. So take the US $2 trillion stimulus package. Take the UK, where I come from. Even if you're Welsh, you come from there as well. The 330 billion that the UK government's put in. That's great. But what do you do with that money? How do you actually use it to maximum effect? And I think this takes some very, very careful policy consideration that will inevitably benefit from, and many governments are having the good sense to know this, consultations with both sides of industry. That is to say, from business and from organized labor. And that's happening. And where it happens, you'll get the best results. But to go to your question more specifically, there are a number of policy instruments obviously available. It can be tax breaks. It can be taking a holiday from social contributions. It can be direct wage support. It can be the schemes for, depending on where you come from, technical unemployment or furloughing, whereby a percentage of wages are still paid to workers who are actually not working but remain on the payroll. There's all sorts of options out there. And I think we have to judge them, their utility by a number of criteria. One is, of course, the basic fairness of all of this. Money is being dispersed from public budgets to help enterprises, to help workers. There has to be, to coin a phrase, a feeling that we are all in this together, and this type of activity is giving benefits to everybody, to the enterprise concerned, to the workers concerned, and to society. So they have to be, I think, designed with that notion of equity in mind. So continuity, equity, and the third word I would bring in is simply sustainability. I'm constantly sort of confronted with the question, are the measures being taken from the health and medical side of things actually counterproductive in the sense that they might be saving people's lives, but they're killing businesses and livelihoods? And I think we have to nail this false dilemma. This is not a choice of one or the other. We have the real key to ensuring the sustainability of businesses and of people's livelihoods is beating the pandemic. And there is some tough medicine to be swallowed. So the effort that is made in resource terms and policy terms clearly has a relationship with a period of time that they can be sustained. And that does require us to integrate the economic and social response with the overall health effort. We have to be really careful that these do not fracture. And let me just give one example to finish my comments, Dan. I won't go on much longer. It's put to me, for example, that workers, take the case of India, where there's been this dramatic lockdown. How long is it reasonable and feasible to expect that a day laborer, a laborer who has no reserves of resources, no source of income now, how long is it reasonable to expect that person to go back to their village, go back to their dwelling and sit there and do nothing with no source of income whilst this pandemic passes by? The answer is that is an impossible dilemma unless we manage to deliver to those people the type of support, the type of life-saving, life-sustaining support that they badly need. This is perhaps the sharpest edge of the drama that we're facing. And, that 61% of working humanity that makes a living in the informal economy is, as the pandemic spreads, as I'm afraid it will, particularly to the developing world, that is a drama that they're going to live. And my goodness, isn't that a challenge for us all? And I think a key to the response lies in the hands of the United Nations. And I'm proud to say, I think, under the leadership of the Secretary General, the UN is stepping up, but it needs member states to be part of the story.
Thank you. Sharan, Burrow, in a world where so few people have access to unemployment benefits or healthcare support, paid sick leave, Give us your thoughts on what social measures you think are urgently needed to protect lives and livelihoods and build resilient economies and societies. What role should and can companies take?
Well, I think you have to divide the companies, as both Guy and Roberto have talked about, into the global brands, but also the small to medium enterprises. And of course, many of those small to medium enterprises are dependent on contracts from the global brands. Now, we see a split in the global community, and for all those Global Compact members, I urge you to think about this. We would support access to loans for large business to fulfill their contractual payments, to provide for future orders, to help secure those small to medium enterprises. But it must be that that money goes to, of course, the workers and the small business owners. So we want global brands to step up, and can I say many are actually dipping into their own reserves because they don't have a cash flow. And ironically, if there's one area of unfair global competition, it's that right now the only retailer in operation is actually Amazon. And yet all of the other retailers have got a lockdown except on essential products. So we want to help those companies that want to help their suppliers and their workers. Beyond that, of course, Guy's outlined the case. So wherever we can keep those businesses alive, let's do that. But for me now, the huge fear, the enormous fear, is that so many people are simply without income, and in many cases simply without food, or in some cases water. So access to health, Guy's right, this can't be compromised. You have to have people and their health first of all. But we also have to see that there's equal capacity for people to survive so that they don't die of starvation. And so that's where our focus is now, on supporting the ILO and the other UN agencies to make sure that with the dialogue in design and implementation with the global social partners, employers and unions, we can help put massive social protection in place, even as we support all schemes to both in country and globally to support small to medium enterprises to stay alive.
Thank you. There's an urgent need for companies to identify and scale up innovative solutions through their core business capabilities, their operations. Can you give us your views, Roberto? What's needed to support enterprises and to protect their supply chains, and how is the IOE supporting its members?
Well, first of all, I have to say that, again, never before an international coordinated and concerted policy response has been more needed, okay? But I could stress at least 4 or 5 points which are critically important for companies. First of all, there is an emergency need of liquidity, of cash, to cope with this situation. Many of these companies are being locked out for 2 months, for now 3, 4 months, and the situation is, for many of them, not sustainable. What is an employment question can become also a humanitarian challenge in many countries. And we are not just talking about dependent workers, but also about self-employees and employers. We have been calling to mobilize resources, and we are welcoming the call of the UN Global Fund, and we are also making our call also to institutions, financial institutions like the IMF, the World Bank, regional banks, etc. And both Sharan and myself, we have addressed many of the directors of these financial institutions. So there is a first need for liquidity, but that's far from enough, because the problem is that, and that's the second point, this liquidity needs to reach what we call the real economy. It's very often the case in many countries that bureaucracy does not allow to get this cash to the companies, especially the small and medium companies that are needing it. There are too many intermediates, there are too many unnecessary requirements, and in many cases we cope with the reality of informality. And I'm now referring to areas like Africa, like Latin America, where informality is big. At the same time, we have to realize that these companies also need people spending money, and people are confined. So we have to find ways in which, perhaps through digital means, that in which we channel also the real economy in a different manner. The third element is we need to have an innovative approach and flexible approach on employment schemes. And many companies, together with governments, are already looking at that based on past experience. And I will refer to that later: part-time, short-time, special pay leaves, wage subsidies, employment suspension schemes, but also skilling. Sometimes we forget that that's going to be critical also for the continuity of many companies. And I have to say that the effort that many companies have made in order to become digital and to be continuing in their operation is huge. Fourthly, I think that we have to start, and at IOE we are already starting, to pave the way to resume work when possible in a progressive manner. We are already working with some federations, and these federations are already identifying some key principles based on experiences, by instance, of our Chinese members on how to resume work in a safe but sustainable manner and quick manner. Fifth, I told it before, but we need to assure a quick recovery, not just in essential services, but in areas and sectors that are critical to recover jobs. And that has to do in many countries with tourism, restoration, industry, transport, garment, retailers, etc. It depends on each country, of course.
Yeah.
For me, these are the 5 areas in which we need to have an innovative approach and which can make a huge difference in our answer.
Thank you. Thank you. And I'm conscious that time is passing. We're getting a number of questions on the Zoom platform, which I'd like to come to. Before we go to those questions, I'd just like to ask you briefly to answer the question about, at the Global Compact, we're advising business leaders, decision makers, to use the 10 principles of the Global Compact as a guide. What advice do you have for leaders facing very tough decisions? Maybe just a short answer from each of you. First, Mr. Ryder.
Well, firstly, to pick up on your point, Dan, I think that the Global Compact's 10 principles will serve global leaders very well in these circumstances, just as much as they do in, if I can say it, normal circumstances. I think there's a slight sort of worry out there that at a time when our personal liberties are being restricted quite fundamentally, we can't go and do what we want as we usually would. There's a sort of a feeling, well, it's okay now. We can let go on some of the basic rights at work. We can cut corners. This is wrong. This is absolutely wrong. We all accept that in these situations of emergency, we can't act with the normal full freedoms. But the 10 principles of the Global Compact don't fall into this category, I would say, of principles that can be short-circuited in our current circumstances. And my second answer to you, I'll be very quick, is national leaders have also to be global leaders. They all want to do the best for their countries. They're all very understandably investing their resources in helping out their own citizens. But unless we get this global reflex as part of that reaction, we ain't going to get the job done. And I think that's another thing that leaders need to step up to as a responsibility.
Thank you. Sharan, what's your advice to leaders in this situation?
Well, first of all, just echo Guy. You must coordinate internationally. We must hear the voice of those leaders who are finding the situation desperate for them in their countries, and we must support it with a global solidarity. But beyond the immediate, we also need global coordination to see that recovery, reconstruction, resilience is absolutely already being thought about, even as we deal with the emergency situation. Because while we don't know the time frame, we do know that we are going to need a massive recovery plan, and that we are going to have to make sure that deals with the convergent crisis. First of all, the response to COVID-19, employment, social protection, all of the things that we need in a new social contract. And as Roberto said, the implementation of the ILO declaration from the Centenary Conference would go a long way. But we also need to recognise that saving people's lives now is essential, but you can't then risk people's lives and livelihoods and the global environment with climate emergency that's left undealt with. So we definitely need that convergence, and we need to look at the design of a future economy, both nationally and internationally, that takes account of the risks and opportunities of technology. So a lot to do. We say social protection, social protection, social protection now. Let's protect everybody, inclusive of health, income, food and subsistence, but let's also work together for a one world future that is more balanced and certainly fairer with a rights base.
Thank you. Roberto, what's your advice to business leaders, leaders in this crisis?
Well, there is a sense of responsibility for all of us. And again, we would be not up to the expectations if we do not start being quick in our answers, and also being somehow flexible in our strong old battles. And I can tell you that that's the approach that we had when we came together, at least between ITUC and IOE, to have a quick answer. Sometimes there are many, of course, differences that we need to set aside and to start revisiting, bearing in mind the current circumstances. This is a first step. I mean, just have a different mindset, which means that you have to overcome many of these past difficulties based on a new scenario now.
Right.
That's one. The second element is related to the 10 principles, but also is linked to what Sharan has said, has to do with the fundamentals on which the business community has adhered. In the case of the ILO, the fundamental principles of right to work. I mean, this is the driver of our future. But let me just say that there is also an element which was very well brought into the Centenary Declaration last year, which has to do with a concept that perhaps this concept is not so known outside the ILO, but it's very important. We call it sustainable enterprises. I mean, enterprises that have a sustainability path. And in order to do that, I think that we have to work on two bases. On one side, we have to assure the fundamentals, but on the other side, we have to assure a proper environment for business, especially also for small and medium company, to create in a sustainable manner jobs. Those are the two areas in which we have to work now with much more ambition than before. That's my key message.
Thank you. Thank you. Now, here's a question that's come in from a lot of our participants online. We've got a couple of thousand people joining. One question is, how can developing countries support workers losing their jobs, especially when there are no social protection measures in place for them? Mr. Ryder, short answer.
Yeah, well, I mean, the fact of the matter is we're in a world where only 25% of the world's population has any effective social protection. Now, it's too long-term an answer to say you have to build social protection systems in our current circumstances. So we're in the situation of emergency responses. And it is, and I echo what Roberto and Sharan have said, we've just got to get the basic needs of survival to people who more and more will need us. Now, yes, developing country governments have a responsibility in that regard. I doubt very strongly that left to themselves and left to fend for themselves, they'll do everything that needs to be done. So it is here more than anywhere else, and Sharan has called for a global social protection fund, that the global community has to step up. It's about saving people's lives here just as much as it is in protecting them from the virus.
Sharan.
I just agree totally. And we need to make sure, of course, coming out of this, that never again are those systems not in place. If you look at just the money that's been pledged through a variety of means, direct support, through special drawing rights for liquidity on the table for the IMF, and indeed debt relief, which we would hope would bring with it a conditionality for countries relieved of debt for a short period, or hopefully for a much longer period, or exempt from it, to play into supporting those critical sustainable development goals, including health and social protection. But can I say, we need funding not just for now. It's affordable that we would fund the poorest countries for 5 years at least to build systems beyond the response Guy's absolutely right about, and part fund many others. Otherwise, we will not realise or be conscious of the devastation that's ahead of us, and none of us wants to live with those consequences.
Roberto, let me add to that question. Where will the money come from? I mean, we've seen the need. We're hearing a very, very bleak picture of what needs to happen in the coming months and years ahead. How can developing countries support workers, and where will the money come from, do you think?
Well, I referred before that there is a strong need for fund mobilization globally. I mean, it's very difficult for countries, I give the example in Bangladesh, Cambodia, countries or in Latin America, countries with weak governance systems, weak institutions, corruption, high informality, that all of a sudden you have the means to set up in a short period of time the social protection schemes that are needed to face this emergency. And there I converge with Sharan and Guy. I mean, it's really impossible to do that in that short time. What we can be doing already is to start working on some schemes, some of them linked to social protection ad hoc schemes, but not necessarily. Sometimes you have, again, innovation on employment ad hoc emergency tools. I'm talking about, again, part-time, short-time, special paid leaves, wage subsidies. Those instruments can be effective and have proved to be effective with some caveats, of course, depending on the situation, also in developing economies. Where will the money come from? I think that we need global mobilization funds. We need to make an effort from different sources worldwide. And of course, to the extent possible, also the private sector will have, and I'm sure will do also its contribution.
Well, thank you very much. We've heard a lot of good ideas, a lot of concern, a very bleak picture. I'm just going to ask you to answer the last question very, very briefly. How do you see the role of the SDGs, the global goals, as a framework to kind of build back better in this situation once we get through this immediate sort of humanitarian crisis? How can the Sustainable Development Goals act as a roadmap, perhaps, to get us out of this situation? Mr. Ryder.
Yeah, I think they're vital, Dan. I think it's very significant that when the United Nations Secretary General put out his message about crisis response, pandemic response, he said, we have to win the health war, we have to beat the pandemic, we have to deal with the economic and social destruction that it has brought in its wake, and then we have to recover better, and we have to get back to the SDGs. And I think this is the point that cannot be lost from view. Let's imagine the pandemic, disappeared tomorrow. We will still be left facing the same development, climate change, inequality challenges that we had the day before the pandemic. They haven't gone away. They haven't gone away. And let's recall that we weren't really doing that well on the SDGs, Dan. I think all the reports showed, all the scorecards showed that we were behind track on every one of the 17 SDGs. I hope the pandemic will have served to concentrate our minds and send us back to the task of realizing the SDGs. We're only 10 years out, aren't we? With greater determination and with greater investment of political will and resources.
Thank you. Sharan Burrow, we've talked about this decade of action for the SDGs. How do you see those goals as a roadmap from where we are now?
I think it starts from today. If you look at SDG 1 on poverty, and we want to ameliorate that, then I think it's 1.8 that deals with social protection for all, fundamental today. Let's make a start. If you look at 3, then it's indeed, maybe it's 1.3 and 3.8, but goal 3 on health is absolutely about universal access to free healthcare. It's not in place. It has to be right now, or we won't deal with the crisis of infection, but we have to take that forward. Goal 5, if there's a gender lens to this crisis, then it's pretty horrific. 70% of healthcare workers are women, more than 53 or 4% in the services sector, And in the informal economy, the overwhelming number of workers are women. Plus, we've seen, sadly, due to vital measures, an increase in a spike in domestic violence.
Yes.
So 5 is critical, and 8, decent work, fundamental. We cannot go into a world that we just left, where we do not regulate global labour markets, because what happens is what is happening now. And of course, I would say on the sustainability goals, including climate, we have to just emerge with an integrated approach. So the SDGs, fundamental as a roadmap.
And finally to you, Roberto Suárez Santos, just a short answer, please, and then we'll wrap up this session, because I know Mr. Ryder may have to leave us very shortly. In fact, we'll say goodbye to Mr. Ryder right now. Thank you very much for joining us from Geneva, the International Labour Organization. Thank you so much, and we understand that you'll have to leave. Roberto Suárez Santos, a final word from you on the importance of the Sustainable Development Goals to lead us out of this situation.
Well, the Sustainable Development Goals is a policy agenda that will need to be our driver. The objectives are ambitious, and we were already saying that before this COVID-19 crisis. They are pertinent, and for many of the reasons that the previous intervenants have said. I think that fighting against inequality is more pertinent again than ever, and we could see a situation in which if we do not act with effective measures, this inequality can increase. Also, the same goes for poverty, but also bear in mind that all the effort that we have made also to improve situations of extreme poverty, also on income increase. I mean, the increase on the standard of living can be wiped out in just some weeks if we do not act quickly for the quick recovery. I would have to stress that there are 2 angles that, again, are crucial for achieving the goal.
Very, very briefly, please, Roberto.
One has to do with SDG 8, of course, which has the angle of productivity also, and also decent work. And this is an angle that we should not forget. And the other one has to do with SDG 4, education and reskilling. The digital era is right now here. That can be very, very helpful to come back from this emergency situation.
Thank you. Thank you so much. This has been a really fascinating and rather depressing conversation in many ways. I'd like to thank Roberto Suárez Santos, the Secretary General of the International Organization of Employers. Thank you for joining us. Sharan Burrow, the General Secretary of the International Trade Union Confederation. Thank you so much for joining us. We said goodbye to Guy Ryder, the Director General of the International Labour Organization. Thank you all so much for joining us. You can see on your screen our campaign at the UN Global Compact on uniting business to tackle COVID-19 through the 10 principles, and you can see that on our website. I'd like to invite all of you to join our next session, Academy session, same time next week, on how business can support women in times of crisis. And just to leave you with, I think, a very strong couple of takeaway messages from today on, national leaders, business leaders. We need to think global. We need to be global leaders. International cooperation is key. Thank you for joining us. Thank you to our audience for staying up late in Asia and to joining us around the world. We're very grateful for your attention, and we hope that you found this useful. And so signing off now until we meet again, thank you very much indeed from the United Nations Global Compact Academy. Thank you.